Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Melissa Wiginton. I'm the Vice President for Education Beyond the Walls here at Austin Seminary. This is our first time to do a webinar, Martha, Lynn, and I.
I'm just going to put our PowerPoint up.
We are very excited about this, and we're delighted to have so many of you joining in the conversation. I care about this issue because one of my core commitments is for young people to find their place in the world and to find their place of belonging. And one of my other core commitments is to the life of the church and the dream of the church and the good news that it gives witness to in the world. So that's where my heart is in doing this work.
I'm Martha Lynn Coon. I'm the director of a project here at Austin Seminary called the 787 Collective. And our focus is on the spiritual thriving of young adults in Central Texas. I'm really excited to hear from all of you today. We're excited to share some information with you at the front end of the webinar. I just wanted to say, to try to keep the audio integrity of the webinar tight, our web managers muted everyone at the beginning of this presentation, and we have invited people to introduce themselves via the chat function, which you can find at the bottom of your screen, a little bubble, like your text message bubble on your iPhone. So if you have a chance to type in a little introduction, if you haven't already, we welcome that. Also, if you are having technical difficulties or questions, or if you need to communicate with us or with the group during the webinar, that message function is a good way, that chat function is a good way to do that. And as Melissa said, we come to this work with the intrinsic motivation of just the spiritual health and well-being of young adults in our communities and in all of our communities. And we're really excited that you share curiosity about that and passion. And we have some information that we're going to share with you on the front end of the webinar, as I mentioned, and then we'll have more time for discussion in the second half of the webinar. So
let's get started.
Yeah.
Martha Lynn mentioned she's the director of the Director of Congregational Innovation for the 787 Collective. This is an innovation hub that we are leading with 12 congregations in Central Texas. It's a project funded by the Lilly Endowment, and we're one of 12 innovation hubs around the country. So you are part of our learning, and we want to share with you where we are going with this, how we're thinking about it. And so that's the context for this conversation. Go ahead and advance the slide. Okay. When I wrote the description for this, I said young adults in churches are as rare as hen's teeth. And as Martha Lynn and I were preparing for this, she said, what does that even mean? And I realized that I was using this expression that I had learned from my grandparents who actually had chickens in their yard. Well, now I know having chickens in your yard is kind of a thing, but I realized when Martha Lynn said that I was using this metaphor that really I was kind of enacting the problem, because we use metaphors that don't relate to the lived experience of a lot of people that we're trying to communicate to. What I meant when I said that was they're rare, okay? Young adults in churches are rare. And I know from previous conversations that many of you have young adults in your churches, and we are very glad about that and hope that maybe the people in this webinar can connect even to have further conversation after this brief hour that we have together. So while many of you have young adults in your congregation, many people don't. And in fact, overall, the numbers are much lower than in previous generations. And we'll go into that a little bit more as we move through the 4 areas that we want to cover in this webinar. So during this hour, we want to contextualize the situation in which we all find ourselves. We want to complexify the story around young adults. We want to think theologically a little bit, and then we want to talk about how the church is responding to the realities of this situation and open it up to think about the future. So let's just get started with some data. I want to say about contextualizing the situation that we're in the midst, we're not to talk about why things are the way they are, but to just look at the facts. And you all know this, but I want to start with real data. And this is all available in the link that we sent you to the Pew Research Center 2014 study. This slide, and I know it's a little bit hard to read, but it's trying to demonstrate the change over time in generations of how many young people are religiously affiliated. So basically you see in the blue line at the top, that's Gen X. And the millennials are at this, I don't know how to show you that. That little dot at the top that says 26, that's millennials and how connected they are to the church. So you can see that there are fewer, and this is a change from the level of involvement in the church in previous generations. If we took a look at 100 people in the US and line them up relative to their religious affiliation, what you see in this slide is that there are as many, the column to the left is 18 to 29-year-olds. There are as many Protestant affiliated 18 to 29-year-olds as there are unaffiliated. Okay? So just let that sink in for a minute. I'm going to assume it's sunk in. The thing I want to say about this is that this data shows us that the number of people who are disaffiliated is growing. And the reasons for this are multiple and complex, as we know. But what I want to say to you today is, I think it's worth paying attention to what our feelings are about that. Because I worry that this data cultivates a sense of shame or evokes a sense of shame in a lot of congregations. And my worry about that is when there's shame, there's so often blame. And so people end up blaming themselves or their pastor, or their denomination, and worst of all, they blame the 18 to 29-year-olds. And I want to say, we can't change this cultural trend. All right, this is way beyond our control. And so looking at how you and the people in your congregation feel about that seems important to me, because if we don't look at our unexamined assumptions, if we don't look at the story we're telling ourselves about why this change is happening, we're going to be stuck. And we're not going to be able to respond with the fullness of creativity that I think God is gifting us with and is leading us toward. So that's my first little sermon. The second thing I want to say is that there are changes in the religious landscape, not just in cultural changes, but in the religious landscape. And so, there are, when you look at the people who are religious, there are fewer and fewer of them who are going to church. And this is just the reality. Now, in the whole population, young adults are 22% of the adult population who are religiously affiliated, but fewer than 10% of them go to church. So that's another piece of the religious landscape. And you will be both happy and sad to know that Christians are not the only ones dealing with this. In the Muslim world, they have a big concern about young people becoming unmosqued, okay? So they say, yes, I'm Muslim. Do you go to a mosque? No. Why would I? It's boring. It's not relevant. They don't talk about things I'm interested in. And that may sound familiar to some of us who are Christians. Similarly, in Reform Judaism, there's a big movement to, how do we get the young people into the practice of the Jewish way of life? And there have been big efforts, much like what some of our denominations have done in the Reform Judaism movement, to figure out how do we meet the young people where they are and get them to become practicing Jews. So in the religious landscape, you see across all religions, young people are not participating in the traditional ways of faith communities. But the second thing I want to say is there's another movement that is sort of what we call religion-like. And if you had a chance to look at any of the resources we gave you from the How We Gather website, they have really named this dynamic, because they've looked at, they started with the question, well, where do young adults get together? And they started identifying things like CrossFit gyms and supper clubs and all these other places where young adults gather. And they are religion-like, is their argument. They have rituals, they have high levels of accountability, they have participation, and these organizations are starting to find out they have some of the same problems that churches do. But I raise this because it's a place where you can see people being led by, I think, religious instincts, even though they don't name it that, but the church is in general not connected with those communities. I recommend that you look at that data if you haven't, in the report particularly called Something More, because the conclusion that these researchers come to is that these organizations are not able to connect with the questions of ultimacy. So they've got these practices, but they don't know how to get to the deep questions. And my prayer is we know something about that. This slide is from a new art installation in Austin. It's a chapel. We were there last week. It's beautiful. It's spiritual. It is not religious. And so I thought it was a good representation of this. The last thing I want to say in this section about understanding the context is I think that a lot of young adults find, as I referred to when I was talking about the Muslims, find the ways of Christian life in community, in congregations, just not attractive. And so there have been a lot of people who have looked at what are the things that happen in congregations where there are a lot of young adults who are lively and involved. And I want to share with you this list of characteristics so that you can do the math yourself. This is the list of characteristics about what congregations who have young adults look like. And you will see where you do or do not connect in the congregation you serve. So welcoming and accessible, relevant and relatable leaders. And what I want to say here is, this doesn't mean they've got, soul patches and Guayavera shirts. It's more about sharing leadership. And the significant paradigm here is away from the powerful, charismatic leader to shared leadership in ways that they want to go where the pastor knows their name. They want to go where they can talk to the pastor and feel like there's a connection there. Relationships and caring, this is, community. This is the probably strongest thing that we hear a lot of young adults say that they're looking for. And it's not surface, it's not, you're just introducing yourself every Sunday when you're passing the peace, but it's a congregation where people are involved in each other's lives in ways that show caring. Social justice oriented, obviously we see young adults involved in an incredible number of social justice movements, and they want to go to a church where they can advance and find a home for expressing their social justice commitments. Spiritually vital and alive, this means we're really walking the talk of being followers of Jesus. And so there's a seriousness about the gospel in these congregations that is thick enough and deep enough to allow these young adults to really, they trust that it can hold their weight and it's offering them something that's not just superficial. And finally, this hashtag use me or lose me is, these are congregations where right away young people can get involved in something. They can do something that's meaningful contribution to the life of the congregation. You may notice these are good characteristics for congregations, whether they have young adults or not. So basically the bottom line is young adults want to be involved in congregations that are alive, that are healthy, and that are vital.
So I'm going to talk a little bit more about this story of who these young adults are, which is something, I hope is obvious, but with full disclosure, we're still learning a lot about. I came to this work after coordinating an intentional community for young adults for 6 years, and I felt like that gave me a strong context for understanding this generation better and these people, but I'm still learning every day how little I know. So we're inviting you on that journey with us. But here's a little bit about some of our work and questions we're asking and our approaches to finding and mining answers to those questions. So a question that we're holding in our work and we're holding with you today is this question about what do millennials want and or need to spiritually thrive both in and outside of community, and how is the church uniquely positioned to help them in this pursuit. So while we were thinking about this question, and in our work, we're working with a cohort of 12 congregations in and around Austin to try to find new and innovative and engaging ways to walk alongside these young people in their spiritual life, and also invite them into new ways to be part of congregational life and new ways to celebrate the traditions that are congregational life. And so we were doing an orientation for these churches back in June of this year. And as we were putting our materials together, we were challenged, or I was tasked at the time, to find an image that represents young adulthood. And we were going to have the congregations that were in discernment around this project respond to this image. So this is the first image that someone in the group put forward. It's a well-known cover of Time magazine and an article they did that was specifically focused around the millennial generation. And I mean, it's interesting, right? I mean, the cover puts forth this juxtaposition, you know, the me generation. Millennials are lazy, entitled narcissists who still live with their parents, and why they'll save us all. So there is already sort of this fascinating juxtaposition there, but also obviously a lot of the bias and judgment that Melissa was talking about earlier, you know, just about when we have shame around changes or challenges that seem sometimes daunting and insurmountable, like where we put that shame, and sometimes that becomes blame. And I can say personally in my own work with millennials in the first couple of years, I felt like they were driving me crazy. And that was because I was sort of buying into this stereotype. Yeah. But here are some actual young adult responses. So that picture didn't really, I mean, I thought, well, this is interesting. There's a juxtaposition there, but I don't feel like it really sums up what we're looking for. So I solicited from young adults, I knew some responses. Like if you had to pick one image that summed up your young adult experience, what would it be? And here are some of the responses. This is the first one. This was hilarious. And my first reaction was like, have you actually seen the original Willy Wonka? Like, I don't think they know who Gene Wilder is, but whatever. I mean, it was true. I mean, I think I felt like it was a, for me, point taken. Like, nobody has their life figured out in their early 20s, I think, if we're all honest about that. And I know a lot of these young people are struggling with those questions and feeling so much the pressure of time, ironically, for those of us who are slightly older than our 20s, that they feel an enormous amount of pressure to figure things out. This is the next one. This is one of my favorites. That this was this person's synopsis of their young adult experience, what it felt like to be a young adult. I can relate to this one. And because I happen to know this young adult, I thought that is exactly what your 20s feel like. So anyway, this is sort of calming and funny, and I could watch it a long time, but for the sake of time, we will move on. And then this was one of the other responses. And this person actually sent two images, and here's the next one. And these really sort of stopped me in my tracks. I'll go back to the one before. This sort of image of this woman with all of these things written on her face and her body. And then this one. And it was just really evocative to me, because I think, you know, I have a lot of fun with all the young adults I work with. And then I have these moments of just like, whoa, there's so much happening in their lives, and they're growing up in a really complicated time. And both of these really startled me in the best sort of way. And this is what this young adult, and with her permission, I'm sharing this, wrote about her 20s. And I'll read it and read along. And I think we're also, just as a side note, happy to share these slides with you guys after this is done, if that's helpful to you. So know that information can or will be forthcoming if it's helpful. I think when I reflect on the last 3 years of my early 20s, it's been about trying on different selves by going through different experiences. Am I like this or am I like this? Do I like being this way and doing that or not? What is the image I present versus what is authentic? What are the values I let steer my boat in the vastness of the sea? I resonated with both of these images. I found where there is a confusion and mess under the surface of what one sees from the outside, a deep questioning and a struggling to find peace, I suppose, or a sort of understanding of the world and how I fit into it. It is disarray and it's beautiful and necessary. And so I follow it all up with my antidote summed up in a quote from Lao Tzu about letting things be as they are, not resisting the messiness that happens, but leaning into it and noticing it with mindful compassion. So this was an incredible response, obviously, and this is like where this is the part of this millennial identity that does feel like they will save the world. And here's the quote from Lao Tzu. Life is a series of natural and spontaneous changes. Don't resist them. That only creates sorrow. Let reality be reality. Let things flow naturally forward in whatever way they like. And this, I think this moment was really powerful to me for a lot of reasons. Also because I feel like this is in some ways what the church is being called to do, which is let things flow forward naturally, but that's not what the church is, that's not really how churches are organized. That's not how we function. And we are in a liminal space, an in-between space and in between times. And you know, here was this young adult proffering something that really felt like a very appropriate response and sort of an answer to a lot of this anxiety that we are feeling. And so that's great. I mean, how we partner with these people and have them, how we meet them where they are and how we together form community is a potent and difficult question, but I definitely think that the answers are there, but we will only find them together. And by together, I mean, together as church, Big C Church, and also together with these young people. So from this image to this image, I think the question that persists is where in the space of these realities might the church have room to maneuver and something to give? And this was our charge. This was our charge to our churches. Good luck and get ready to be creative.
And thank you for joining our webinar today.
They have. Anyway, our churches or the churches in this cohort that we're working with, the 787 Collective, are already getting in there and getting creative, and so we're all working on this. And then just to sort of complicate this a little more, I want to talk though about this millennial, because even in that experience we had, there's still a subset of millennials that their voice is really not the voice that we are hearing loudly, and I think we have to be very conscious in our response, because we're adjusting our own work as we speak, sort of, because some of our earliest assumptions and a lot of the cultural assumptions around millennials, like the sort of assumptions that inform that Time magazine cover, are in response to one specific portion of the demographic of millennials. And this is a study from 2015, a woman named Kimberly Quick, was published by the Century Foundation. But she wrote that generational researchers usually identify millennials, people born between the years 1981 and 2000 as the most educated, most diverse generation to date, and they're right. Over a third of millennials hold at least a bachelor's degree, and 43% of millennials identify with one or more minority group. So it's true they are the most diverse and the most educated, but if you look at that statistic and then look at the flip side, that tells us that about 66% of millennials don't have a college degree, and 57% do not associate as a member of a minority group. So while it's important to raise up these generational characteristics, it's also important to notice they don't cover everyone. In fact, it's a large swath of that population that is still, trying to find a vocation and make income without a college degree. And we have to be very careful about this in our work in Austin, because the demographics of Austin have changed so rapidly, and a lot of the young adults who are coming in here work in higher income sectors like the tech sector. And so as we're doing our work, we're really struggling with trying to figure out how we do create work and address these challenges in a way that covers a larger demographic of young adults. And part of this is the legacy inheritance of a lot of mainline denominations. And so I think it's something I just want to hold up as a way to complicate. We're learning about young adults. We need to listen to young adults, but we also need to be really conscious of the voices that we're hearing and what part of the millennial population they represent, particularly when we're trying to craft needs-based responses to what they're dealing with every day. Yeah, so let's keep thinking about this. Melissa's going to walk us through some of the theology, and this is just one little bit from that article. Just she's a millennial herself, and when she's talking about millennials, she was talking about how in a digital age where connection to other people is only a click away, we can easily consume music, clothing styles, dance crazes, and recipes across cultures, but we can't live each other's experiences. And I'm always looking for little like breadcrumbs like that for us as a church to understand where we fit into this picture and how we can meet these people where they are.
So we've just talked for 30 minutes and put out a lot of ideas. I want to say that in our work in this effort, the first move is listening. And as Martha Lynn shared, really what she was demonstrating is the work of listening and beginning to reflect, really hear and reflect on the lives of young adults and who are in our churches, and then the ones that are invisible to us. And so listening to the young adults, and then listening to your community, who's out there, who's not even part of it, that's in your landscape. And then the next move for me is for us to think theologically about this religious demography, the changes in religious landscape, the religion like the young adults who have the messiness underneath and all the labels that have been put on them and the realities of their lives. And so I want to slow down a little bit right now and think theologically. So I specifically want to ask first, what is going on here? Where is God showing up? Where is Christ present? And where is the Holy Spirit moving? I think one of the gifts of us even asking these questions, and one of the, hopes, promises, possibilities from this reality of young people being disconnected from the church, is it's pushing the church to ask a lot of hard questions and pushing the church to make some changes, whether young adults come back to the church or find the church or connect or not. These questions that you're starting to ask, Carmen, about, well, what is this? Let's back it up and look at how we're treating children, and let's, look at our leadership structures, and let's look at what scriptures we talk about and how we talk about them. Those are all stirrings of new life caused by this reality, which so often makes us feel, and maybe I'm projecting, but feel ashamed or feel defeated or feel discouraged or anxious. And so we want to scramble out there and do something. But I think that's part of what's happening, is it's calling us to account and rethink. And so as we make the final turn in this webinar, Martha Lynn has brought some reflections and some things that we've learned from people in the 787 collective,
sweet little collection,
that we hope will inspire you in particular ways. As she's queuing that up, I guess the last connection I wanted to make is about looking back at our history and tradition, what a shock it was when the Gentiles were able to become part of the church, and people had to rethink how they were going to think about this and make up new stories. And sometimes I think we're at such a critical change in the human experience that it's almost like that.
Well, so I just wanted to share with you sort of some of the essentials that we feel are essentials that we are including in our work, our approach to this work. the very first thing is listening. That came up in the discussion, listening to the Holy Spirit. And we included a link here. We developed a discernment guide for congregations we were working with that were in discernment around this question of whether they felt called to really engage with this population. And feeling called meant, you know, is the Spirit moving? Do they have capacity? That in itself was an awesome process. And that resource is there, available, it's free. So basically, you know, we put a premium on listening. The discernment guide is there for you guys if it's helpful to you or anyone in your congregation. The other thing, this is very much, Edward was touching on this earlier, but relationship, not membership. We have really stressed this with all the congregations we're working with, and that it's essential that they're approaching this work with millennials in terms of the integrity of the relationship, building the relationship, the energy going into relationship, and not just trying to recruit new members for the church. And then tradition innovation is the third component for our work, which is the first place I heard that term was Duke University, but it's basically like, we are who we are. We are Christians. We come with a tradition, and that we are trying to innovate within our tradition. That doesn't mean we just like ditch our tradition and start doing new things. I mean, we hope we are doing new things, but that we're doing that with integrity so that they are part of who we are as Christians and the tradition that we come out of, you know, which is awesome and also very fraught, but that we're honest about that, and that's how we're looking at innovation, is within that context. I have some examples from our collective work that I'm happy to share with you. I really want to hear from you guys if we can, and I had some questions that I would love to hear from you all, if you're, and I'm happy to chime in as well and share from our experiences, but I'd love to hear from you, because I know a number of people are working with young adults, sort of, if you'd be willing to share a young adult ministry concept or practice, and within that, what you find is working and what is challenging, and also any questions you'd like to bring to the group about your experience or in general. Like, some of the people who responded to Melissa's inquiry on Friday had really specific questions about sort of how they work with young adults, and they were, I think, curious to learn how other people are doing it, like particularly like, you know, if a church has a marriage ministry, like, are people sort of working with married young adults separately than single young adults, or how is that sort of shaping up? I mean, and everybody here is coming from a very different context, so there's no expectation of, you know, what any of these experiments with young adults look like, but we'd love to hear from you. With some of the things that we've been doing in terms of listening, we've done a couple of experiments around finding ways to listen corporately, and sort of mine for stories and information about the 2070 experience. And two of those things that we did 3 public storytelling events last spring in conjunction with the Hearth, which is Mark Yaconelli's organization in Ashland, Oregon. And we found in each storytelling event, we had 6 young adults in Austin who were working around particular social justice issues. Each event had a social justice theme. One was refugees, one was creation care, environmental justice, and then the third was around immigration in general. And so that was a way to get 6 young adults up on stage to tell personal stories about their lives and have large groups of people listen and hear. And we also did a thing where we commissioned 6 short plays sort of about the young adult experience. Those were fiction, but it was a really rich way to kind of get in and we used young adult performers and to hear about how the stories resonated with them, and also sort of think about what defines the 20-something experience. In terms of tradition innovation, we have a church in San Antonio we're working with that's developed a liturgy called Lighten Up, which they hold outside the church on Sunday evenings, and it's oriented towards young adult, and it follows a traditional liturgical progression, but instead of having a sermon, they have like a dialogue section, and they're dialoguing about current topics, and it seems to really be providing or meeting a need for that kind of engagement. And then they use prayer stations. So the service is really oriented to be low key to be accessible to people who are unchurched, and also to provide a really interactive experience.
One of the other churches in the collective, as they were listening to young adults in Austin, they recognized that the lack of affordable housing in the city is a major problem. And so they started thinking about the people in their church who are empty nesters and have these houses that have all these empty bedrooms in them. And they started wondering, what would it be like if they, you know, rented out their rooms to some of these younger people who can't afford a place to live? Well, that's a pretty radical idea. And it's real neat if you're talking about them living in somebody else's house. So they ended up starting by just having a conversation where they invited 6 or 7 young adults to meet with 6 or 7 of the older people. You know, they had gathered everybody together at the Spider House, which is this, you know, hip place that I always joke that they card there and I'm too old to get in. But they had a conversation there, and you know, nobody ended up saying move your stuff in, but it really surfaced a lot of things about what does it mean to live with people and what is the need. It just created an opening for a possibility that might or might not come to be. But the young people, the young adults who were there afterwards, remarked about how valuable that was, and it's the beginning of forming some relationships. That's another one of the ideas that the congregations have come up with.
Yeah.
Well, we are about at the end of our time, and hope that this has been a valuable hour for you. It's been a great experience for us.
Yeah, and I just we have your email addresses that you submitted those when you registered for the webinar, and I will send you the slides, and you'll have and we'll send you a survey as well, but then you have my email address. And so if there are things that you wanted to offer or questions you have, we're more than happy to be in dialogue about these questions, and hope, you know, over the course of our work on this Lilly grant too, that we will continue to have more practices to share, more ideas, more thoughts, more ways of building community around this work. And so, you know, I guess I just want to encourage you, if you'd like, please stay in touch, and we'll be doing the same.
And if there's somebody that spoke that you would like to have further conversation with, let us know. We can put you in touch, because part of what we are hoping is just really to create a community of connection of people who are feel the burden of this situation. All right. Thank you very much. Have a great rest of your day, and we hope to see you again.
Thank you.